So without further ado, good evening. My name is Bungane Mehlomakulu. I'm with the Integral Group, and on behalf of Integral Group, welcome, and thank you for joining us for the panel discussion this evening. We are in for, I think, what should be a good conversation around the Living Building Challenge and some other topics that have come up along the way. Integral Group, we're a multidisciplinary MEP firm focused on high performance, deep green engineering, and we're strong supporters of the Living Building Challenge, have a couple projects completed ourselves, and we're glad we're able to lend our support to the event here this evening. And of course, a great thanks to the USGBC National Capital Region chapter, for whom, without them, this event would not have happened at all. And especially, I'd like to thank Mary Thomas, who's over here, who wrangled all of myself as a moderator and our panelists together to make sure that we stayed on task and got our ideas and thoughts collected together and slides and all that kind of thing. So thank you very much, Mary. So the format for this evening is going to be a panel discussion, and the first thing I'll introduce our panelists with sort of some bio and background information. Susan up here is going to give us a little information on the DC Living Building Challenge Collaborative. We'll have a few words from each of our panelists before we start into our conversation, have our discussion, and then enter into the question period. One thing I am going to do is just swap over our presentation here. So for questions this evening, when you checked in, you should have received a index card or a couple index cards. If you don't have any, that's how we're handling questions this evening. If you don't have any, just raise your hand and would like to have one. Mary here will be happy to come up and give you some. Basically, the idea behind it, rather than, we weren't sure what the mic situation was going to be, so what we will do is if you have a question that comes up along the way, write it down, and then at the end or before the last or second last question, Mary and Susan here will come along and collect them. If you could pass them down towards the end of the row, I'll probably say something before we ask the last question. And then Susan will sort through them, and we want to try and get group together the ones that are similar, if there are similar themes, and put together some questions to pose to our panelists for the last part of the session. One request on that is to please write clearly if you want your question to be understood. I know for me that could be sometimes a bit of a challenge. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. They'll each be coming up afterwards to give their presentations. The first up is Robert Phinney. He's the Director of Sustainable Design and Energy Services for HDR Architecture. An architect with 18 years of experience, he focuses on sustainable design and solutions to promote efficient operations. He leads the diverse team of HDR sustainable design professionals who manage the lead process for a range of science and technology, healthcare, governmental, and university projects. He is an active in the green building community, including the local and national USGBC initiatives, the City of Alexandria Green Building Advisory Board, the local Living Building Challenge Collaborative, and is an ambassador for the Living Building Challenge. He brings deep experience in implementing sustainable strategies in federal, civic, and healthcare projects, as well as policy development assistance to many regional municipalities and organizations. Recognized as a LEED Fellow in 2013, Robert has long been active in the development of LEED systems, credential exams, and is an active participant in the development of the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure Envision rating system as one of the first accredited professionals and system verifiers. Next panelist is Bill Updike. He is the Green Building Specialist for the District Department of the Environment, where he is responsible for managing building policy for the city government, as well as encouraging innovation and advancement in the high-performance building sector. Prior to joining the department, Bill worked as a project manager for a renewable energy company, a construction manager for a design-build firm, and an outside sales representative for a green building supply company. In the early part of his career, Bill worked as an environmental journalist for 2 national magazines. He received a bachelor's degree from the University of Notre Dame and a master's degree from the University of Arizona. And also, if you haven't picked up by now, I am also Canadian. I say project or project interchangeably, and we'll say about and house and other interesting words that sound different to all you Americans. Assuming everybody in the room is American. If you're not, then that's fine too. Last up is Peter Dew. He is the founder and partner of Dew Consulting, LLC, a firm committed to supporting architects, contractors, developers, and owners in achieving their sustainable design goals. Peter is a consistent leader for the state of Maryland, and his achievements include founding the Maryland chapter of the USGBC, leading the development of state and city sustainable initiatives, and currently serves as a commissioner of the Baltimore City Sustainable Commission. He is a past president of the Baltimore chapter of the American Institute of Architects and is a member of its College of Fellows. In recognition of his work, he was awarded Innovator of the Year in 2009 by Maryland Daily Record. He uses his architectural experience with net zero energy projects and the LEED rating system to assist design teams in developing creative, project-specific, and appropriate strategies for sustainability and project certification under a variety of green building rating systems, including the Living Building Challenge. He likes to garden and golf, sometimes simultaneously, which I'm sure is much to either the chagrin or joy of the groundskeepers. And so with that, I would like to invite Susan Block-Moore, who is the founder and facilitator for the DC Living Building Challenge Collaborative, to come up and say a few words about the collaborative itself. Susan?
Hi. Okay. I want to also thank everybody for coming and thank the USGBC for putting the event together. My name is Susan Block-Moores. I am the founder and facilitator of the DC Living Building Challenge Collaborative. The DC Collaborative is one of 60 international collaboratives. Each is a community-based group rooted where it is planted to facilitate change. The main goal of the DC Collaborative has been education. We lead educational events and building tours. We have also contributed to the certification process of the Gaddy Residence, a local project which Peter will talk about shortly. The Living Building Challenge founder, Jason McLennan, defines the collaborative as a trim tab. Does anybody know what a trim tab is? What's a trim tab? A trim tab is a tiny piece on a rudder on an ocean-going vessel. The trim tab turns the ship by moving in the opposite direction of the boat. Like a trim tab, individuals and organizations can make change that is disproportionate to their size and scale by steering away from the mainstream. Trim tab is the name of the International Living Futures seasonal publication. I encourage you to look for the Trim tab publication on the ILFI website, living-future.org. I am here today because I saw Robert speak at Design DC a couple of years ago, and I approached him after and I said, what can I do? And that's all it takes. There are many ways to get involved. We have a meeting next week, Thursday, the 3rd, from 9 to 10 at DDOE, and if you have questions, let me know. Plenty of space to be a volunteer ambassador or facilitator. You can now become a Living Future accredited professional. The annual unconference is May 21st to 23rd in Portland, Oregon. We have a Facebook page, which you're welcome to join. And once again, it's living-future.org. If you have any questions during the presentation, once again, fill out your card. We'll pick them up, we'll sort them, and we'll try to answer all of your questions. Thanks again, and enjoy.
Thank you.
All right. Well, what a crowd. I'm so happy to see so many people out here, current friends and future friends. So thank you for joining us tonight for this discussion. And hopefully this is just the start of a longer discussion, because I think that the common theme that you'll see throughout this presentation and through our discussion is that These are things that can happen. These are things that should happen, and these are things that can happen now because they should, if that makes any sense. So my job is maybe one of the hardest tonight here. I have to give an hour-and-a-half presentation in 5 minutes. So bear with me. I'm going to give you I know a number of you have heard my talk or various talks about the Living Building Challenge, but I'm going to start off by simply giving you a good 10,000-foot overview of what the Living Building Challenge is to kind of lay the foundation to what we're going to be discussing later on tonight. So Jason McLennan is full of symbolism. You heard about the trim tab symbolism. But the first one that he likes to push through is the symbol of the flower, which is the symbol of the Living Building Challenge. And the reason for this is that he saw these incredible synergies with the way that we might want to address our built environment. So what is it about a flower that can speak so great volumes to what we need to be doing? Well, a flower is a place-based solution to a problem or to a solution. It is an organism that grows in one spot, stays in one spot, gets all of its food, its water, its sunlight, all the energy that it needs from that one singular location. It actually gives back at the end of its life to promote growth in the future without any sort of artificial means to make this happen. You know, it degrades back into soil and promotes, it plants more seeds and promotes more growth. And ultimately, it allows for landscapes to take on whole new ecosystems, because they may be pretty flowers to us in the desert, but this is a whole ecosystem that is supporting plants and animals beyond just the flowers you see on the ground. So such a simple organism, far simpler than our human brain, has somehow figured out a problem for existence that we haven't yet. So what is it that we can do to become more like a flower in our built environment? Well, we can do a living building, right? So I gave you one example of a real building. This is a building in Hamburg, Germany, that uses algae to produce energy for the building. So it's starting to look at this concept of a living organism being an integral part of what that building is. Of course, we've got Chia House over there. Is this really what we're talking about? Well, it's a start, perhaps. Maybe this is too literal. So why don't we just go through quickly here and talk about a little bit about the system, and you could start to see the synergies, not just on the literal side, but in terms of social economic equity, as well as a way to promote healthier and a more sustainable future. So the Living Building Challenge is a certification system, as opposed to LEED or Green Globes or Envision, for that matter, which are rating systems. So there is only one level of accomplishment. It is certified as Living Building Challenge, or it's not. They do have a partial certification. But again, unlike those other rating systems, it's not a pick and choose to create the better balance. This is an all or nothing enterprise for you. So the way it's set up is very much like these other systems. In this case, it's broken down into 7 petals as opposed to areas of concentration. And within those 7 petals, there's a total of 20 imperatives. Imperatives you might call a credit within LEED or Green Globes. But again, full certification is hitting all 20 of those credits for a new construction project. The system is a singular system that is designed to actually address all these different typologies. So from new construction to renovation work to site infrastructure to the neighborhood scale as well. So there are means and methods to be able to achieve a Living Building Challenge certification at all of these levels. Just to quickly go down to give you an overview of what the different areas are, what they're trying to address. The first Petals site is really starting to look at a car-free living. It's starting to address the need for urban agriculture. So something unique about this system, it actually requires urban agriculture to be in practice for a living building project. Water is actually a fairly simple concept here. It's net zero water. No water in, no water out. It's about keeping it on the site. It's about using, like a flower, surviving on the water that is provided to you by nature in the best possible way. And it's not just that for the building water use, but it's about keeping the stormwater on site as well and promoting growth at an ecological level locally. Energy is even simpler, net zero energy. And this is a performance-based measure. So after a year of performance, you actually have to verify that your building had no net positive use of energy. So obviously a building's going to use energy, so there are renewables in this conversation, but every time they promote a new living building challenge, it's less and less renewables because the efficiency is getting better and better. But again, it's can you provide enough energy for your building right there on site like a flower? Health is starting to take a look at, well, clearly the idea of a building, 90% of us being indoors, a building promoting or degrading from our own physical health, but about the health of the people around you, psychological and physical. Materials has taken a very stringent course. They're actually trying to push for a toxic-free future. I know there's been a lot of discussions about transparency and red list. Well, this is the origin of that red list of materials, trying to eliminate PVCs and coppers, some very common building materials from our building stream. Equity, another interesting idea. You talk about sustainability as a three-legged stool. Systems like LEED tends to talk about one of those legs, whereas the Living Building Challenge is trying to address the economic sustainability of the impact on a community as well as the social side of sustainability, social equity, social justice. And then something that is perhaps the most unique of all for a living building project is that they actually promote this idea of beauty. Beauty being the inherent side of purpose behind an object in the world that we live. If it has no beauty, whether it's a functional beauty, whether it's an aesthetic beauty, it really has very little purpose typically. So think about all of the things around you. It's not, beauty doesn't just mean that you enjoy it with your eyes, but do you enjoy it as a function? Is it promoting a better society around you, the better community? And then just to summarize here, they do have this handy dandy cheat sheet here, which gives you a cross-section of the 7 petals, the different typologies, the requirements. As you can see, some of them, like restoration, you can't do some of the imperatives, so they actually exclude them. But generally speaking, this is a good summary of all the different areas that you'll be addressing within the Living Building Challenge. So that's it. How'd I do? Hour and a half and 5 minutes? So, okay.
All right, so I get to do the opposite of what Robert did, and I get to do a 1-minute thing in 5 minutes, so I'll talk really slowly. I also have a bit of a cold, and I saw the Muppet movie the other day. I'd like to say it was because my 10-year-old nephew was in town, but actually I just wanted to see it. And I have this fear that I sound like Kermit, but hopefully that's not the case. So we're doing a great job in DC in terms of good, solid green buildings. We are first in the nation in LEED and Energy Star certified buildings per capita. I mean, we blow every other city out of the water in this category. It's something around 130 square feet per capita right now. The next closest city is about 70, I think. First in the nation, green power purchase, first in the nation, and bike share. You know, you can see the rest of the list on the stage. So we're doing a lot of great, good, solid green stuff here in DC. But the question is, we're not a truly sustainable city. And in fact, I would say there isn't probably such a thing in the world yet. So back in February of 2013, we finalized our sustainable DC plan for the city, and we have some very serious targets that the mayor has set out for us and that the planet demands of us. Climate reductions, 50%, energy reductions, 50%, renewables growing to 50% of the total load of the district. Water, use 75% of our landscape to filter the water in the city. And then the built environment to meet net zero energy standards with all new construction by 2032. I would charge that 2032 is way too late. So we're doing great, but great isn't enough. And I think we all know that, and you wouldn't probably be in this room if you thought LEED Platinum was enough. So this is I just realized that you can actually see me in the, oh good, you can't see it up there. In the reflection of this picture I took, this is a picture that is in our offices at the Department of the Environment, and I walk by this picture every day. And it's signed by one of the astronauts from the Apollo 8 project, and it says, "To DDOE, protect our planet." And you know, when a dude that's like flown around the moon tells you to do something, like you kind of have to say yes to this, right? You kind of say, all right, Bill, you know, we'll do our best here. And then the other thing that I think about when I see this sign is I think about dates. I think about May 25th, 1961. Does anybody know what happened on May 25th, 1961? No? Okay. Well, it's pretty damn obscure. So, I mean, the date is not what happened. So that was the date of Kennedy's speech, the going to the moon speech. And July 20th, 1969, I'm sure, you know, you can figure it out. That's us landing on the moon. So this is kind of a cheesy thing to do. I know a lot of people talk about this sort of moonshot stuff. But, I mean, goddamn, I mean, this is 8 years we went from this speech to landing on the moon. So, like, you know, why can't we build Living Building Challenge all the time? Why can't we figure this out? I mean, we spent a lot of money, of course, going to the moon, but that's a separate issue. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So one of the things that we've done, last year I created a grant program out of our Green Building Fund to fund innovation and research. And one of the first projects that we funded is a study that looks at the differential cost of building net zero energy, net zero water, and Living Building Challenge in certain large prototypical buildings in the district. So large multifamily new construction, large new commercial buildings, large commercial renovation projects. So we are wrapping the study up right now. It should be done in the next basically 2 weeks. A bunch of the ILFI folks went on vacation this week, or we would have it today, and they deserve it, of course. But it was a team of the New Buildings Institute, Skanska, and the International Living Future Institute, which manages the Living Building Challenge. Bunch of really smart folks working on this project. And the cool thing about it is we have real financials from real projects in DC that we're modeling off of to look at what these differential costs are. And so on this, I don't know if you can see, oh yeah, you can see that. On the top chart is the first cost. And none of us want anybody to think only about first costs, right? I mean, value over time is really essential to a lot of these conversations. So you can see some of those percentages, 5 to 10% net zero for new commercial. You can see them up there. What I'd rather folks pay attention to is these return on investment numbers. Net zero energy, that's deep energy efficiency there on the left. Net zero with deep energy efficiency, and then net zero without. Some interesting things have come up about this, which I won't get into in terms of how we are incentivizing solar versus energy efficiency in DC, which we learned on this project. Pretty fascinating. But, I mean, 30+% return on investment for net zero energy. Pretty remarkable stuff. I mean, I don't know what everybody's 401ks are doing, but 30% is much better than mine. And also less risky as long as the sun is shining at some point. So the challenge here that we have is this. The size of buildings, we have very large buildings with very small roofs. And so the challenge is, up on the left is a picture of, on the left is, this is how many solar arrays you would need if you were to build just to the regular energy code. I don't know how many that is. I should have counted those before. 17. Nice. They put the number on there, which made it easier. Really smart people at ILFI. The second one is LEED Platinum. You need 10 rooftops, basically, of these certain type of prototypical buildings in DC. And then even if you drive to very deep energy efficiency, I'm talking about 20 to 30 EUI kind of scores in these buildings, we still need basically 7 rooftops and these large sort of downtown DC buildings. So that creates an interesting challenge. We did pass last fall a community solar bill, which allows for virtual net metering, which helps in some ways to answer these questions. But there's a lot of more questions that come out of this scenario in terms of what we're doing for what we're trying to do for Living Building Challenge. And then you can see down here as an example of what Robert was talking about with scale jumping. We're really going to need to find district energy solutions if we're going to drive to zero energy, in particular on high-rise buildings in DC. So that chart shows that a little bit. So the purpose of this study wasn't just to do a study and find some numbers. My goal is to then, I don't want you all to go talking about this after this, so if we could have a blood pact or something at the end of this thing, I'd appreciate it. But my goal is to bring this study and the results of this study to the DC mayor and city council to talk about creating an incentive program around very deep green energy efficiency, zero energy, zero water, and Living Building Challenge. Because at this moment, we have the technology, obviously, and we know how to build these things, but what's going to incentivize somebody who owns a big office building downtown to find 6 other rooftops to get to zero energy? There's some complexities there that I think we need to step in and drive some incentives to try to change the marketplace and try to get there before 2032 or 2050 or whatever the number is, because we just don't have time to wait. So hopefully within about 2 weeks, we will have the study finished and we can blast it out to everyone and you can all check it out. And I look forward to the questions and answers period after Peter's turn. Thank you.
All right. Oops. Okay. So we're going to do a little scale jumping here. We're going to reduce the scale. I'm going to talk about this house that I've been working on with folks from the Living Building Challenge Collaborative in DC for a year or maybe a little bit more. It's a residential project in Clarksville, Maryland that is pursuing 4 certifications. It's, I think 4. It's Energy Star, Passive House, LEED version 4, LEED for Homes version 4, Platinum, and Living Building Challenge. So that's been interesting because some of these rating systems have contradictory requirements. Living Building Challenge and LEED Platinum in particular, no, Passive House and LEED Platinum in particular having issues, contradictory issues about ventilation rates and so on. But we're working on a presentation now to be given at the Living Future Conference in May. And Robert talked about the flower being the metaphor for the Living Building Challenge. And so what we're doing is we're presenting with another house that is being has been built in Bend, Oregon. So it's a high desert climate. They get about 10 inches of rainfall a year, and don't really have to deal with the humidity that we have to deal with. We, on the other hand, get 43 inches average annual rainfall, and as Robert indicated, one of the requirements is managing your ecological water flow on site. So we have to deal with all of this water on site. In addition, we have neighbors whose water is kind of draining onto our property, flowing across our property. So we've had some interesting challenges. So I'm just going to say a few words about the things that I think I'm beginning to realize, even after I've been working on this thing for so long, what really is driving a lot of things, and it has driven us, I think, in ways that we don't really realize, and we're just beginning to understand. So the things that you really want to deal with is you need to deal with sun, right? That's your heat source. So all of this stuff about building orientation, and you'll notice how flowers will track the sun over the course of the day and things like that. So interestingly, this house was just enclosed prior to our, sort of month-long 20-degree weather. No mechanical systems, no heat in the building. It never got below 58 degrees in that house at night. And it would warm up during the day in the mid to upper 60s. So while it was 20 degrees outside, and at nighttime even below in the teens, this house was between 58 and 68 degrees constantly through that entire period. No mechanical systems at all. So pretty interesting stuff. And then the other thing that I didn't really understand, it was only after we started putting this presentation together and I started talking to the landscape architect about the water, she was saying, this is really a big deal to try and deal with all of this water, because not only do we have sort of more water than sort of this other house that we've been talking about, but because of climate change, water storm events are more severe. So we go through periods of drought, and then we have these rain events that are sort of torrential, and so dealing with that kind of water flow has been a real issue. And we have these mulch barriers and bioretention, and I mean, she's using some things that I really hadn't understood that we were using, and that I hadn't really heard of. I mean, we've all heard of rain gardens and bioretention things, but these I forget what you call them, mulch barriers or something like that, were sort of a new device. And we actually have some questions to the Living Building Institute about the purpose of their specific requirements for this petal, because trying to keep things on site is not really what nature does, right? There are no site boundaries in nature. So if we're trying to mimic natural water flow, what are the requirements, what are the limits, and how do you measure? So then I said, well, if the big deal is water and the sun, that's really what plants do, right? That's what nature does. It responds to sun and water. It's the food, both energy and hydration. And so we're going to compare these two houses and see if these two flowers that we've created can be distinguished in their landscapes. That's an exercise that we're about to go through. One of the things, just dealing with the construction, and one of the reasons that the house was able to maintain temperature is, I mean, how many people here have worked on a passive house project and are familiar with passive house requirements? So it's sort of this continuous air and moisture barrier and sort of super insulation. And you can see this house has been built very much like a thermos. So the light brown tracking all the way around continuously, even under the slab and so on, is entirely encases this house. So this is just a detail to give people some sense of the construction of this particular building. And I just have a closing slide to share that it's hard to get pictures now because the construction vehicles are still all around the place. But you can see this is the building enclosed and enjoying itself out there in the sun. So happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Peter. Ask the panelists to join me up front here. One slide I wanted people to try and sear into their memories, because it's going to come up later on in the conversation, so when we get to it, is this is a map, and it's actually a world map, but this is just zooming in on the North American portion of it, showing the location of either completed or registered Living Building Challenge projects. And so the size of the circle is by state and the number of projects. So even though it looks like really big circles out there on the West Coast, the reality is when you actually start to add up all the smaller states you have out in the East Coast, the sum total of those numbers, you have to take my word for it because the chart is somewhere off by Australia, or the legend is off by Australia, that the sum total of those is actually much greater than what you're seeing out on the West Coast. And I'm going to hopefully hit the off button here, and the display's going to go on. If not, we'll just stare at that. So, first question for you guys to talk about. Be interested to hear a little bit more about your experience working with the Living Building Challenge. Robert, you mentioned the certification systems versus rating systems and that kind of thing, and how your experience has been working with those with Living Building Challenge compared to other systems out there, such as LEED, Green Globes, Energy Star, and so forth. What are the advantages? What are the differences? What are the hurdles of the Living Building Challenge compared to some of the other systems that are out in the market? And it doesn't matter who wants to start, Bill, if you want to start, Peter, it doesn't matter.
I think Peter has the most direct experience.
So the Living Building Challenge, I mean, there's something very nice about the Living Building Challenge because the goals are very clear. It's net zero, and so that's the goal, and so you work with your team to figure out, how are we going to do this? The same thing with water and so on, and I think a few other of the Petals, as Robert mentioned, you would think they were somewhat subjective, and I think maybe they are, but I think things like beauty and equity and things, it sort of just keeps you sort of focused on sort of important elements and makes you think about those things. But it's clearly a very big challenge to accomplish these things, and I think even just to figure out how to interpret some of the requirements. And so one of the big differences between working with the International Living Future Institute and the U.S. Green Building Council, for example, is throughout the project you have access to the entire community, not only the ILFI, but the other community of teams that are pursuing building certifications. And they have monthly team calls, so you'll be on the phone and people will be calling in from Australia or people will be calling in from other parts of the country and dealing with a whole variety of questions similar to the ones that you are. So it's very supportive in that way, but the challenge is definitely, I think, greater than what you can imagine even for a LEED Platinum project.
I think the one thing that I would add is that I haven't worked directly, except with a little bit of help on the Gaddy House, but I haven't worked directly on a Living Building Challenge, but I do monitor them. I do have a lot of friends who are working on them. It's something that, as an ambassador, I've ensured myself that I would remain current on the issues surrounding it. So that said, I think the one thing that surprised me the most, and still in some ways surprises me, is clearly net zero energy and net zero water sound like big hurdles to move forward, and they certainly are. But time and time again, project teams are very clearly saying that the biggest hurdle has been the materials pedal. I wish I could go into much more detail about what the requirements are, but again, it's red list free. Red lists are carcinogen or toxic in some sort of way. 90 to 95% of the building materials out there have red list materials in them. So automatically, if you're doing a red list or a Living Building Challenge, you're only looking at somewhere between around 10% of the building materials available to build your structure, because so much of what we have on the market nowadays has chemicals in them. Very little natural, very little organic based materials. So that has been by far the biggest hurdle for any Living Building Challenge. Bill was talking about the technologies that exist out there, and the technology to get a net zero energy and a net zero water building has existed for a decade, easily a decade, if not longer, in some of the building practices that we have. But the technology has existed out there. A PVC-free pipe doesn't exist unless you want to go cast iron, ductile metal. There isn't an alternative material yet. So very interesting on that.
I guess I would just add that, I think that we're going to be driving towards performance-based solutions writ large. Already the codes are starting to get there. Energy code, there's a new proposal for the 2015 energy code that's going to have an alternative compliance path for performance-based code on the residential side, on the single-family side. And so, if you think about, where IT is going, where smart building technology is going, where, sub-meters, all this stuff is driving us to get to the point where, we'll be moving towards performance-based goals, I think, overall, instead of sort of chasing points. And I think that, because the Living Building Challenge is already sort of set up that way, you can see where it's going, right? You can see where we might end up. And like Peter said, it's, zero energy, it's not like, oh, should I do project electric number 13 or it's like straight up.
It's not rocket science. Right?
It's not rocket science. Did I say that?
It's getting to zero.
I should have. Damn.
I should say
Oh,
something.
and I keep swearing on, and I forgot that it's never on.
I should say something
Recorded and
about.
put out on the internet.
I'm a
I should
government
say something
employee.
about the owner of the Gaddy House. The owner of the Gaddy House is a rocket scientist.
He actually is.
He works for the Applied Physics Lab, and his job is designing solar arrays for satellites and space stations. That's his job. So that's who we're working with. Just FYI.
So just think about this from the hurdles and people recognize the zero energy, the zero water, especially from a cost. Robert, you're saying that you get down to dealing with 10% of the materials. Bill, the report's not done, but was there any drill down detail to say, okay, of that X percentage increase associated with Living Building Challenge, that's coming from looking at a smaller segment of materials, or is it coming from the energy, the PV you have to put on? Was there any sort of additional drill down material that people will be able to have access to?
Yeah, in the study, we drilled down to a number of different areas. A few things are a little bit tougher to figure out, like the materials piece in particular. So we basically added, FTEs. We added, staff time to really kind of do the research and everything to that. But yeah, there's some drill down on the energy side and on the water side in particular. And each petal of the Living Building Challenge, we have models in the study that sort of show what the differential costs and some of them are zero. Like beauty, like just make your building look pretty. Like there's some things that shouldn't cost any more. It doesn't always happen, of course.
Yeah, it's harder than you think.
Yeah, I know I'm in a room of architects, and
Of course the
you all are.
architect,
Yeah, you're building beautiful buildings, but some of them there's zero differential costs, and some of them are just building smarter. But there are some things that they're going to cost more, and we need to figure out how to get beyond that first cost conversation and into the long-term value conversation.
Yeah. So somewhat tied into that topic, how have you seen the Living Building Challenge influencing the design and construction industry? When LEED came in, there was this tipping point where it just sort of blew through the entire industry. What are some of the seeds that you're seeing associated with the Living Building Challenge?
I would have to say what strikes me the most, because I'm so interested in this concept, because we have such great knowledge out there that we can actually start sharing some of this. We live in a very competitive industry with small margins for profits, and so in some ways knowledge sharing is counterintuitive to what a lot of us feel like we need to do. But what I've seen in particular on the material side is this whole notion of, if I've figured it out, I'm going to share it with you, because there is this vision of a future that we all want to share. The money will come. But what good is the money if none of these projects move forward, right? So I'd have to say that the Living Building Challenge has really promoted this sense of free share, which is only going to benefit us years to come within the industry.
And there was an anecdote there's a project, a Living Building Challenge project in Prince George's County, And they have been going through the materials piece as well, and they've been talking to manufacturers. One of the things that happens in Living Building Challenge is if there is nothing available in the marketplace to satisfy the materials piece of the materials section, you know, you can do things like writing letters to manufacturers and demanding that they, you know, figure out a way to get that toxic thing out of their, you know, material or whatever. And one of the things that's happened on this project in Prince George's County is 2 of the manufacturers have actually looked at all the stuff that was in their products and have actually decided to take some of the toxic things out of their product. They didn't even know, you know, what was in there. And so they've actually decided to change the product so that it would fit in with what the requirements of Living Building Challenge is. And to me, that's like a perfect, exactly what we want to be happening, right?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, also that you know, we have like regulation and law and stuff, and that is the goal of that is to try to push people, but you need something out there that's pulling you, right? Like a vision or a visionary thing that's kind of like, you know, pulling us along and inspiring us. And, you know, it's doing, I mean, I'm not building Living Building Challenge projects, but I'm inspired by it from a policy-making perspective, and it's pulling me for sure, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. And in the same way that when LEED came out and, you know, the VOC credit was there and nobody knew what a VOC was, you know, least of all the manufacturers, or, you know, and then suddenly there were all this data was available and it became no big deal. So, and I will say this about USGBC and ILFI, you know, if you talk to Jason McLennan, he'll say that it's not sort of an either-or thing. The Living Building Challenge wouldn't exist without LEED, and LEED is also helping drive some things. So if you're familiar with LEED version 4, there's a environmental product declaration label that will be required for materials if you want to achieve that credit. It's optional, but you can do it. But between LEED having so much of the market and now having this requirement, and Living Building having its basically imperative, so you have to do it if you're doing Living Building, I think the market in the same way will transform in the same way that it had sort of earlier, and I think that's all for the good.
Thanks. So this is excuse me. So most of the projects that I'm aware of that, you know, that we've worked on, and the other Living Building Challenge projects that I hear out there, and even the ones that we're asked to come and join, often it seems to be the owner that's driving the process. They've come down and said, you know, we would like to do the Living Building Challenge. What are some of the common motivations that come up when discussing Living Building Challenge project with owners? What are the reasons why they're saying, this is something that we want to do, this is something that we want to go after? And it may be that they don't even know what they're getting themselves into. They may have just heard it, you know, whether attending a session like this or something similar, and said, you know, that's in line with what we want to do. What are some of the motivations?
I've actually talked to several owners over the last year about other Living Building projects, and all of them are, you know, it fits their mission. They're either, at least my experience is, an individual like our residential owner who has his own sort of motivation for doing this, or they're an institutional or nonprofit organization for which sustainability is really at the core of what they're about. And so I think it's very mission motivated. I have to say, in the case of one potential client, they haven't sort of pulled the trigger on this yet, but it's competitive. You know, they have peer institutions that are doing things and they want to do one better, you know. So I don't, you know, whatever it takes. And if they're commit, you know, I think if they commit to doing it, that they'll see it through. But and they're not being nonchalant about it. But definitely one of the reasons they're looking at it seriously is sort of a bit of competition with their peers. And I think so. That's what I've seen.
I'd rather go to the owner and find out what the
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't own anything. There's a developer in DC that I know that doesn't believe in climate change, but he's building some of the greenest buildings in the city because of competition.
Right.
You know,
Market forces.
that's exactly
right.
where we
Yeah.
want to be, right?
Yeah. So this is coming at the question from a different perspective, and Robert, probably closer to where you and I are from as designers. Peter, you've had the opportunity to work on some living building challenge projects. But one of the questions I'm frequently asked is, how do you talk to and engage with a client or owner about blank? And blank can be high performance design, plug loads, energy efficiency, living building challenges. So looking at the living building challenge, how can design teams, if they have someone who's maybe they're right there on the edge, they've already said they want to do LEED Platinum, you're looking at the typology, you got a bunch of things that may be working for you. How do you start having the successful conversation with an owner about undertaking a living building challenge project?
I think, you have to be honest with what's going on. But I think, we just started talking about it. I actually took this owner on a tour to the Phipps Conservatory, which is a living building, challenge building going through its performance period right now. But it's complete, and you can visit it and walk through it and get a tour, and they'll tell you sort of all the things they've done. And so I think just seeing that somebody has actually done it makes it believable. It's not this mysterious thing. It's not something that is so expensive, impossibly expensive, because Phipps is a nonprofit, and they managed to do it, and for their own reasons. But I think anything you can do to show them that this is real and possible goes a long way to convincing them to consider it seriously. And then I think they need to consider it quite seriously, because it's a major commitment.
And the fifth story is a perfect one because, they went from LEED Silver on their first project to LEED Platinum and now to Living Building Challenge, right?
Right.
And so they have seen what's possible. They've wanted to improve, and it's like the perfect narrative, right? Because, they don't have a lot of money, like you said, but
Right.
they just have gone through the phases, and they get more confident each time. And that second project was going to be LEED Gold, and they were like, screw that, let's get Platinum. And
Right.
yeah, I think hopefully we'll see some of that in DC. Yeah.
At the end of the day, the owner is the one that's telling you right off the bat what they want. If you're not listening and you're dictating to them, you'll never get to that part of the conversation. And talking to the design professionals out there, you all know this already. You've got to listen to your client first. And what we're finding, we haven't actually started any of these, but we do have irons in the fire for our Net Zero and Living Building Challenge, that these clients are, if you listen to them, they don't quite know what they want. They want something progressive, innovative. They want something that's going to save them money in the end. They want something that's going to give them recognition. But they want something that is achievable, too. And so if you start to hear their hopes and dreams, it's amazing how you can steer that conversation. So you're interested in maybe net zero? Well, yeah, I guess that's possible. Tell me more about it. Well, once they've made that commitment, you start saying, well, what about only specifying healthy materials? Well, of course. Okay, well, here's the impact. Be honest with them. But by then, they've committed themselves. And so it's kind of a rolling ball going down a hill. It picks up more steam. And you just have to listen to that client at the beginning. There are more clients out there who are interested than you will ever know unless you start talking to them.
If I can
The market does exist out there.
Yeah, if I can just add, one of the things that was very frustrating when I was working for a large architecture firm is just how timid the partners in the firm were about offending their clients in any way, or suggesting that they do something that hadn't been mentioned by the client himself or herself, would suggest that somehow we knew more than they did, or that they weren't sort of up to speed. I don't know. I just felt like as architects and designers, we need to be stronger advocates for what we know is a better solution. And as Robert said, you are walking a bit of a tightrope. You don't want to offend the client. You don't want to suggest that, and you don't want to beat them over the head or say something. You really need to do this. On the other hand, I think when I started my consulting company, we talked to clients, and they said, well, we're really looking to the architects to tell us what we should do. And I talked to the architects, because at that point I could talk to all the architects once I left the individual firm, and they were saying, well, the client's not asking for it. So you have two people who aren't talking to each other, and it's like going nowhere, so somebody has to step up, and my personal view is it needs to be the design professionals. I mean, we're supposed to be the experts, right? So you need to step up and talk about this stuff.
Just a quick survey of the audience. How many designers or architects, engineers, consultants do we have in the audience with us this evening? How many people do we have on the owner's side, whether you're an owner's rep, an actual owner yourself? Okay, cool. Nice.
She's not holding her hand up very high.
Why is she hiding then?
This question goes to the map that we have up there, and this was actually a conversation that started while we were preparing for this session around the regional markets for living building challenges. I come from a little bit more of a West Coast perspective, spent a number of years in Southern California, and as you start to work in different multiple regional markets, there does appear to be a mental model or an assumption out there that living building challenge is the West Coast idea for West Coast projects. It's not something you can do on the East Coast. You can't do in hot and humid climates. And it seems to be on the design side, it can be on the owner side. Yet when you look at the distribution of both completed and registered living building challenge projects, it's actually a pretty even distribution. It's probably even a little more heavily weighted to the East Coast. And when I was emailing with the Living Futures Institute about this, Jason McClellan showed back and said, the first projects that were certified were on the East Coast. What do you see are some of the factors or market conditions that either support or disprove this perception or assumption people have? You got some warm-up questions. You got to get some more, dig a little deeper here.
They're cheating because they don't have the latent loads that we have. So in our defense, we got to be a lot smarter than those Californians. Hopefully, I'm sure there's Californians in the audience.
Offices too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there are challenges. The Bullitt Center in Seattle, which is one of the first large living building challenge projects. They have a lot of they have operable windows, and they have some things that just aren't being built here in DC for some good reasons, except for, spring and fall, some of the shoulder seasons. But, there are additional challenges here. That's just a fact. But, we can do it. We're smart.
I have a theory. We have a lot of West Coast projects. I have a theory about regulations. Sometimes we need regulations to kind of kickstart something. We would still have asbestos in our brake pads. Everybody knows that, unless the government said this is bad, okay? So sometimes regulations are required to do this. But I also think that regulations can turn into a crutch. So it's kind of a passive warning to the DC government here. But in California, they're very big on regulating minimums, and they're very good standards that the rest of the company picks up on as examples, and we try to follow their leads. But what I'm seeing is that just like you designed a code, the very bare minimum, they have so many regulations that they're busy designing to that regulation. And I feel that it might stifle, actually, innovation in those environments a little bit more. Whereas we've got these great examples of a regulation that, well, it's not our regulation, but we can achieve that. But we don't have this artificial boundary of having to turn into a form into the local government to say we did it. We can start thinking outside or going beyond. And so I really think that in this particular case, that regulation can stifle that innovation.
That's interesting, because I was just going to talk about how the new construction codes just got approved today, finalized by the mayor, including the new green construction code, which Folia was a big part of. And it's interesting that you said that.
It's
I mean,
gotta
I
find the right
hope.
balance.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we're sort of raising the floor a little bit. But it's interesting to think about it that way. I'll have to ponder on that more. Yeah.
I think the perception of East Coast, West Coast is, maybe it's a little bit of a difference of culture, but as the map indicates, I think it's pretty balanced, I think. There are plenty of projects. And I'll just point out that when Jason McLennan was creating the Living Building Challenge, he was right in the center of the country. He was still in Kansas. So this is a rating system for everybody.
Okay, I have a few more questions in my deck, but I would actually like to gather up any questions that might be out there. We've got about a little less than 15 minutes left in our scheduled time. If you could pass your questions basically to either aisle. I think Mary's going to go down this aisle and Susan's going to come up this aisle. And we'll gather those together and so we can get some questions into the panelists. This while we're waiting for that to happen, this one is somewhat tied to that question. I don't remember which one of you put this one forward. But to say, what is the target market for the Living Building Challenge, and what are the certification projections? I didn't find an answer to this one. I didn't go looking for it, so I'm curious to hear what you guys.
Well, I could talk about the projections. I think that they probably changed, but last year I had this discussion with Jason. And he was very clear to say that this is not a system-wide system. His target is 0.05% of the built environment, and that's so much more than what it currently is, actually. But he ultimately 100% is everybody's target on this. But in his mind, he's trying to lead by example, that people learn these lessons. We get these knowledge-sharing communities. That not everything needs to be a certified living building challenge, but everything needs to be net zero. Everything needs to be a healthy building. This is just one tool to help you get to that end. And in a number of years, we won't need those tools because we'll already know how to do it. That was his thought.
You can use the sort of lead, history as an example too, I think. And in DC, I don't have a chart on this, but if you look at the number of buildings that have been certified in DC for LEED, it's a hockey stick chart. It starts around, in the early 2000s, and then it's, it peaks like crazy. Right around 2006, it starts going nuts on a hockey stick style chart. And, there's going to be a tipping point at some point where Living Building Challenge will have that same, hockey stick sort of chart. I don't know what year that is. We're going to see grid parity price for, fuel cells and solar without incentives in the next 5-10 years. At which point, like, what's the purpose of the national grid? There's all these different questions that come out there. But so I think on the net zero energy and water side, we're going to see that, fairly soon. But I think the LEED thing is a great thing to look at. It's a good example, and it's inspiring because, at least in DC, that hockey stick chart is a reality. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful chart. I mean, it's kind of a boring chart to look at, but emotionally, it's a really good.
The USGBC, I think Dan Winters is leading the effort, and I can't remember the name of the site, to actually look at how that market transformation occurs. How many projects, sort of what's that tipping point where you start to see that explosion? It'll be interesting to see what happens at the Living Building Challenge.
Yeah, they're using the GBIG platform.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, Green Building Information Gateway, gbig.org?
.org or .com.
Yeah, it's a great tool. It's a really nice tool.
You have a question or two for us? Okay. We'll go to another one of my questions. So, looking across, the portfolio of certified projects, projects in process, registered, we've touched upon this a little bit. What are sort of two of the biggest hurdles? I limited this on purpose, so it couldn't just be like everything. for design and construction and ownership teams associated with the Living Building Challenge? What are the things that, we've heard the red list, so maybe that's one. What are some of the other top items that come up for anybody who's, in the OAC team looking to undertake a Living Building Challenge project?
The conversations that we hear on the team calls, I mean, it's definitely materials. Materials occupies really a bulk of the conversation, and I didn't talk too much about it tonight because most of the presentations I've given to this point have been really about materials and the challenge of doing that, and the conversations that we've had recently about looking at, now that we've talking to another team that's done another house or a similar scale project, and talking about comparing the two things. We've gone on to think about sort of some other things as I discussed, but the materials is definitely a huge challenge, and we're hoping that as Robert indicated, this shared database will continue to make that easier, but products are always evolving, so you do have to continue to go back and verify these things, even if you are, you've received a product that was cleared for a previous project. It's probably a good idea to go back and check. But, and I'm realizing that depending on where you are, but in every case, the water pedal is going to be a challenge, I think, one way or the other. You don't have enough, you have too much. You're connected to municipal systems, so what do you do? Or you're not, and so what do you do? And so it's, I think the water pedal is the other difficult one. And I think energy really is not that hard anymore. So,
although specifically on the water side, I would say rainwater for potable, which regulatorily is just not approved in almost any place in the country, and then what to do with black water. Those two
we're
things
talking
in
about
particular.
regulatory. It's
Yeah.
actually, in this case, it
That
becomes a
I
restriction.
could help you with that.
It becomes a restriction, and they've made great headway out in the northeast or northwest because of that issue.
Although even in Seattle, in the Bullitt project, the Bullitt Center had to become its own water utility. Like that one building had to go through the process of becoming an actual water utility in Seattle.
Antiquated standards.
That's not gonna be replicable, right?
Less than 10 years ago, you couldn't do a waterless urinal in DC.
That's true.
So
Yeah,
So
and we do have gray water in the new codes. We have provisions to explain how to do gray water and rainwater collection for reuse, not for potable, but for other uses.
and I want to say again, sort of my belief that as design professionals, we have a responsibility to take on a certain level of advocacy, both for our profession and our planet, but also for our clients. And I'll give you a case. I was working on a project in Baltimore, which is on the Fallsway, which is along the old Jones Falls, well, it would be the watershed, except they've buried the Jones Falls. It's in a culvert under the road, but the site is still in a floodplain, technically, according to FEMA. So we could, and it's an urban site, so the project filled the site. So we did not have a stormwater solution because we couldn't bury the tank. And the owner said to the team, we're 8 blocks from the harbor, we're not going to off-site this stormwater, because the solution was just pay a fee in lieu and they go put it someplace else. So the owner put this challenge to us. This was before Maryland updated its stormwater regulations. So the solution that we suggested was to put a green roof on the roof of the building and to design it to treat the stormwater. Well, this was the first one that was being done in the state of Maryland. It was not a best management practice that was recognized. I had to work with both the state and the city and to get them to allow us to do this as a pilot project. And we ended up putting the green roof up for the same price, essentially the same price. We were actually a few dollars cheaper than the fee that they would have had to pay. And so we ended up doing the stormwater on site, but you had to go and talk to the jurisdictions about getting this done. But I think if you're doing a living building, you'll have to do more of that. There are things you're going to want to do that are not allowed by regulation, and you're going to have to fight for this stuff. And if it makes sense, I think it's worth fighting these battles because you can change it for everybody.
And that's part of the intent
Yeah,
behind the
and
challenge
it's a
as
huge,
well, is to
yeah, it's a huge win.
push both sides.
Yep.
Okay, so first question up here is subject that I'm sure every designer or consultant in the room can relate to is that owners are pushing back on fees for LEED projects for various different reasons that we are not going to discuss as part of this panel. How does that compare for the Living Building Challenge? How are the professional fees? I mean, there's more research associated with the red list. It's obviously the challenges that we just talked about from a policy standpoint on water, researching all those topics, and then there is actually that 12-month certification process. There's that shakedown cruise where the building sort of starts running. How does it compare? What are the reactions from owners in terms of putting the fees together? What are the fee increases? What do those look like?
Well,
Not dollars and cents, percentage.
Well, the owners, there's always a budget, and I don't know of any team that's being compensated for every hour that they're putting in doing a Living Building Challenge project. Is that fair? I know there's some other project representatives in the room. Just as the owners, I think, are sort of mission-driven in this thing, I think the design teams that work on living building projects are also mission-driven in many ways. So I think this stuff kind of gets worked out to a place where the owner says, we can do this, and the team says, we can do this, and one way or another, it gets done. As Susan said, and Robert, the Living Building Challenge, the DC Living Building Challenge Collaborative has pitched in on the Gaddy House to work on some of the material research, and they will be pitching in to help sort of facilitate the documentation of some of the other Petals as well. That's how we've managed to do it for a house. Where you have an individual owner and a house, well, more than a house budget, but it's still a house budget. Some other larger institutional clients, I think, have a little bit more carrying capacity, so you can probably do more and get paid for more of it. But I still think it's a bit of a compromise between the owner and the team.
That said, the owners that we're talking to now about this are also more inclined naturally to want to be innovative, and they understand that innovation costs more money.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to match the fees that we probably need, but at the same time, the kind of downward pressure that we're seeing in fees is not the same on these projects because they know going into it that there's going to.
And also, I mean, just as the early LEED projects, everybody was trying to figure this out, and you spent a lot of time, and now you can, for people that are doing it all the time, you can, I won't say breeze through it, but it's not, it's predictable. And I think as more teams achieve Living Building Challenge and share their knowledge, it'll become more predictable.
You should share your story. Wasn't it you with the LEED story where you in the early days of LEED where they priced a project with LEED and then they.
Yeah, a lot of it's perception. That's a good point. I was helping a friend with a private school. It was a brand new facility for a private school up in New York, and this was 2003 or 4. So LEED was still in its infancy. And he had designed it to be a LEED building. I don't remember what the certification level was, but the drawings had LEED notes in it. The specifications had LEED specifications in it. And sent it out to the contractor, and it came in 25% over budget. And it could have been a million different things, right? It's not just LEED, but still early days. He had this thought, because he thought he'd designed a pretty good building. And he went through and scrubbed the acronym LEED. That's the only change that he made. Sent it back to the same contractor, and it was 5% under budget. So there was a 30% price differential because of a word in the specifications. they got LEED certification, 5% cheaper than what the budget was to begin with. So perception, change, perception. Change is scary.
We're technically over time a tiny little bit. I would like to get one more question in there from the audience before we do our end of panel rant. Can you talk about the challenges and opportunities for living building challenges in an urban environment?
Well, I mean, you know, those slides that I showed, it's tough, in particular downtown, high-rise. I mean, I don't think it's that challenging, other than materials piece, if you're a 2-story, 3-story building in DC with a nice big roof. You know, there's water challenges, and then there's zero energy challenges, I think, on these downtown buildings. I don't know, what else do you guys thought of other things?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think, you know, I know DC's looking at this concept, at eco districts, and, well, more than looking at them, actually, you're executing. So, and I think, you know, it's been recognized in the sustainability community for quite a while that a number of the things that we attempt to do to make a building more ecologically balanced don't optimize at the building scale. So we do need to look at these things, and the opportunity to look at them on a community level, I think, is a great step forward.
Yep.
But you could see how, you know, I was sort of thinking about this the other day, how you could create these virtuous cycles where, let's say you had a downtown office building and they were looking for other rooftops to put solar on so they could get to zero energy. They would probably look to an area of the city that was less expensive from a land perspective, maybe lease on a low-income housing building. That building and their tenants could get some benefit out of it at the same time as the property owner downtown would get some benefit out of it. So I could see some great, you know, sort of virtuous cycle things that could come out of this as well, but challenging.
Yeah. You guys answered that really quick. Do we have everyone interested in having him take one more question? Yes? No? You're a quiet bunch. You've got to be a little more vocal.
You are quiet.
Okay, there we go.
I know.
Okay, so there's 2 questions on here, and I'm going to pick one of them that we haven't, as a topic we haven't talked about. What about after construction? Occupant, ease of use, end use. The fact of the matter is that when you turn a building over to the owner, the people who are most likely to blow the energy consumption, the water consumption, are the users themselves. How do you create engagement around that, learning, understanding? What are some of the tools or processes?
They do have to operate it for a year within the boundaries of the, so they do have that experience. So that's the performance period. And I will say, you know, that it's not easy. The Bullitt Center, which is this 6-story office building in Seattle, all of the tenants, you know, when you lease space in that building, you get a utility budget. And so if you exceed that budget, then there are consequences for that. And the building actually has limited hours of use. So you can't be in the building, you can't pull an all-nighter in that building. So in order to meet the performance requirements of the Living Building Challenge, and if they want to continue to operate within the parameters of the Living Building Challenge, for that particular building with the technology of the time and sort of as operating it now, there are limits, and you have to live within those limits as long as you want to, continue this performance level.
But if you beat the budget, then you also get benefit too.
Yeah.
So it's like that disincentive incentive piece, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that, this idea of what happens when the building gets turned over, I think is that's always the case, that whether it's a LEED building, not a LEED building, a living building, the user ends up using or abusing the building, the product, whatever it is, and it's hard to say what people can do and can't do with their own building.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add to that is that at least the current range of living building challenge buildings that are out there tend to rely on a lot of passive systems, passive solutions, more organic and naturalistic. It won't always be the case, and Bullitt Center maybe push that threshold a bit. But the ones that are out there are in a lot of ways simpler buildings. You don't have a lot of cover-up materials. You know, you don't want to put too many materials. It's hard enough to find the ones you can put into the building, right?
Right.
So it's pretty bare bones when it comes to that. It's a lot of operable windows. Everybody knows how to operate a window. It's that first year of performance to know I need to open it this much during the day and this much and close it this much at night. So there is a learning curve in that too, but it's not maintenance of some foreign MEP system that you need an engineer to come out just to reprogram every other week. It's not that kind of complication anymore, so I think that helps.
Okay. Well, to close off the panel, and then we'll thank our speakers and the like, I'd like to, they've answered a bunch of our questions, and this is their opportunity for basically 45 to 60 seconds to have a soapbox. This is your end of panel rant. I'm taking this from a radio show that I used to listen to, and I actually miss somewhat. And you can pick any topic you want. I'll offer a stimulus as well. But I will, this is the only time for total freedom, but 60 seconds and I'm going to cut you off. So the stimulus that you can choose to take or not is, what do you think is needed to create the market transformation where all buildings can meet the living building challenge? Whoever's ready to go can go first.
All right, so I'm not going to talk about that.
It is your 60 seconds.
I'm going to do a movie review for mine.
That's fine.
I'm going to make a plug for a program that USGBC Maryland chapter has coming up in May. It'll be presented by CASE, which is the Center for Architecture, Science, and Ecology. It's a joint venture between Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and SOM in New York. And it's a presentation on material science. And we talked about these living buildings actually being made of living stuff. And they're doing some really interesting material science at CASE, and they're going to be coming down talking about some of the things that they're doing up there. So it'll be in May. Check out the USGBC Maryland website for the specifics. It'll be at University of Maryland Biopark on the west side, Baltimore, near University of Maryland.
And I'll pull onto that material side as well and somewhat live and building challenge. But Lance is here too, he can attest to this too. It's amazing, as he hides behind the column, it's amazing process that a bunch of firms came together and created this system of transparency or promoting transparency within products, the Health Product Declaration, the HPD. And to me, it's just indicative of the kind of change that we can actually inspire in the industry. And as much pushback as we thought we were going to get by saying, okay, you're a chemical company, I know that's how you make your living, but you need to tell us what's in that seal. You need to tell us what's in that cleaning product. You need to tell us what's in that flooring. Yes, there was some pushback, but what surprised us the most was that when we pulled together the 24, now 37 firms with the kind of buying power that we had, they actually started listening to us. And they were reaching out to us saying, well, I think we can do this. Or how can we do this better? What are the resources that we need? It wasn't the kind of pushback that I saw, a dozen years ago with LEED saying this is going to destroy the industry. It was, this is the way the world is moving and we're going to try to catch up here. So I think that those opportunities, and you as designers out there, push material health because that wave is moving right now. But it's going to be no different when it comes to net zero water, net zero energy, any of these other systems. People are ready for these. They don't know how to do them, and that scares them. But people are ready for it, so push.
Bill, you're up.
I think we need to think of buildings as things that we create to serve people and society and the planet, instead of just structures that we plop on a site. And grid parity pricing for solar.
Okay.
45 seconds.
That was great. I mean, so it's like, you know,
Chia House.
you guys did some time
Chia
swapping
House.
there. So as a group, you were fantastic. So I have a card here also that I missed a few other people who helped out with this event. And if they're still around, I also apologize. So if you can maybe wave or stand up very briefly. Andrea Foss is up here. Jen Rivers. Okay, thank you, Jen. Brian Lantinger. All right, did I say your last name right? Okay, sorry. Jennifer Johnson and Emily English. There's Jennifer. Is Emily still around? There she is. So those are the great folks that helped make all this happen. So a round of applause for them first. And of course, a round of applause for our panelists for taking some time off to be here.